Thanks for being here with us on our Monday Math Day. The Math Literacy Initiative at Ohio State, we're going to have Monday Math Days each Monday until school's out. If you have specific questions, please make sure that you comment on our Instagram or send us a message on Facebook. So we've already had our first two sessions, one on making tens and one on place value. They'll be posted on our Facebook page. Now we're going to talk about my favorite, fractions, and particularly fractions on the number line. So it's kind of a new thing that, fractions could always be put on a number line, but now we're having our students and children put fractions on a number line, and we'll talk a little bit about how helpful that is. So it might not have been the way that you learned fractions. I know it wasn't the way that I learned about fractions, but there are reasons that we have the idea of fractions on a number line now. So let's get going on our work with fractions. One of the big questions that we get all the time is, what does numerator and denominator even mean? Like, they're these big, long names. Why don't they just call them something simple? Well, it comes from something. So if you remember, when you were in school, we had a numerator and a denominator. Denominator. So we have these ideas, numerators and denominators. So what do they mean? Well, the numerator comes from the stem of num, which really means number, or how many. That's what it's talking about. How many? How many? So if somebody just comes up to you and says, how many? Your response would probably be, how many what? And so that's where the denominator comes from. So the denominator comes from this stem, num, and that is for name. So what? So the numerator tells us how many of something, but just like if we walked up to somebody, how many of what? What are you talking about? So the what is really important. If I just went into the grocery store and I said, I want 5, they'd be like, look at me funny and say, 5 what? So you need to tell what it is. So that's the same thing as fractions. So let's look at a fraction first, just to get the terminology down. So a lot of times people use circles. Circles aren't my favorite for fractions just because sometimes they get hard to draw. But let's look at this. So the whole circle, that's our whole, and fractions are parts of wholes, or they could be wholes with other parts. So we have this diagram, and let's talk first about, I know people always jump to the numerator or the number, the how many first, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the nom, the name. What is it? So we have this fraction, and it's broken into how many different parts? So this particular fraction is broken into 4 parts. So its name for its fraction is 4. Now we can just say, now I know this isn't how you usually talk about fractions, but we could just say 4s. That's its name. So if we wanted to talk about a fraction with this circle, we know its name is 4 because there are 4 parts. So when we say number of what? In this case, the what is 4s. So let's look at some of these colored in. So very typical kind of question that your child might have at home. So now they would say, okay, what is the fractional part of the circle that's colored in? Well, the first thing, we already know that the name of each piece, and this is where it gets a little tricky, because if you want the student to have the name, it's the name of all the pieces in that whole. So how many pieces? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the name. So each one of these is a 4. I know we say 4th. But for right now, when you're just starting to talk to your child at home, it's a 4. So how many of those? So let's go back to the numerator, the number. How many? How many of those are colored in? 3. So now we have this idea that we have represented this fraction with 3 tells us how many, and 4 tells us what the size piece is. So it gives us the name of the piece. So part of the issue with fractions is that it has this new notation that students are unfamiliar with. So for years and years and years, we've said that when you see an 8, it means 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Or when you see a 4, it means 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. But now we're saying, okay, now here's some new things that we want to know. We have this thing that we put together that gives us another idea of a number. So these two pieces go together to represent this idea. And so instead of just kind of leaving them like 3 4s, like we look like there, we use a notation, and we use this bar notation. So we put it like that so we know that those two ideas come together as one unit. So these two ideas together, the numerator, the number of things, over the denominator, the name of each of those things, that's what makes this idea of 3 4s. And you can say 3 4s when students are just learning fractions. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The th part of it, fourths, that kind of gets people a little mixed up, and they're saying, well, it used to be 4, and now you're saying it's a fourth. So we'll get there. That doesn't mean they're never going to call it fourths, or never going to call it eighths or sevenths or whatever. It just means let's focus on what it means first. Because once we know what it means, once your child knows what it means, then they can do all sorts of things with this stuff. So this is where fractions come from, and they're incredibly, incredibly important, especially starting to get into 3rd grade, 4th grade. 5th is huge fraction grade level, and then 6th grade you get into ratios and proportions, which is another thing that I'm sure one of our Monday math days will be on. But this is the idea of where these fractions come from. I'm going to erase it, and we're going to put some fractions on a number line. All right, so I'm going to use just old letters, junk mail, and remember on our when I was talking about materials, I posted yesterday or a few days ago, we can just make our own materials. You don't need to have any fancy materials, so we just want to cut strips, just cut strips like this, and lengthwise, and this will be one of our fraction strips. So I've already cut some of these. I have 6 of them here. And we're going to start putting these fractions on the number line. So I'm going to start with a whole. So this is a whole strip. I'm going to put this whole strip up here because that whole is really, really important. This whole right there. So we have this whole. And let's make a number line on here right now, just so we have a place to start. I'm going to make it go out here. Now, if it's a whole isn't, well, we could write a whole as a fraction, but this one we're just going to, we know what its value is. This is 1 whole or 1. So we have this strip that means 1. Now, we're not counting this dot. We're not, not counting this tally mark. It's really the chunk. So let's start talking about chunks. So we have this whole chunk. Now, in 3rd grade, 4th, we start with halves. So I'm going to take another strip. I'm going to fold it in half. And I'm going to mark it just so that we can see it a little bit where that mark is. And then let's put this up here. I'm using this tacky stuff to help us with our living room classroom that we have here. So there we go. There's our half. Now we're going to also fold into thirds. Now thirds is a little bit harder, so we're just doing our best. You know, we're experimenting with mathematics. We're playing with mathematics. Thirds are a little bit harder. You kind of fold. I try to fold them a little bit like this until I can get them sort of balanced out. And they'll be close enough. So we got this folded, and we have 1, 2, 3 pieces. So these are 3s, otherwise known as thirds. So let's put up our thirds. And you'll notice that all of them are the exact same length. That's really important, that they're all the exact same length. Okay, so now we're going to take this one, cut in, we're going to fold it into fourths. So we have this fourths. So if we have 2, then we fold it again. That makes it 2 2s or 4. So now these pieces are 4s. So let's put our 4s up. All right, so we have our 4s up. We're going to do 6s next. So most third grade, it's halves, thirds, fourths, 6. So I'm going to make my 6. I'm going to put it in half and then do this third thing again, where we're just going to try to match it up as best we can. Again, we're playing with this, so there's a little bit of human error going on here. I'm going to mark this one down while it's on my table before I put it up. All right. So this is what we have here. We have our 6. And again, really important that they're all the exact same length. And then 8s is the next one that we're going to talk about. So I'll just make a 2, make a 4, and then the paper gets a little bit thick at this point, so I choose to just make a 2 out of each of these 4s. So I'm going to make each 4 into a 2, or each, you know what I mean. So we got this. So what do we need? We need 8 equal size chunks. That's why I said we're going to do our best. We're going to do our best, but we know that they have to be equal sized chunks. So I'm putting my lines on my folds just so you can see it at home. And we'll put this up. Now, we're going to use these to make some determinations. All right, so we can look at this, and there should be a whole bunch of fractions right now that you can put on this number line. So another thing, so I like to use some sort of straight edge. I'm just going to use another envelope that I have around the house. And we're going to talk about what's called a unit fraction. A unit fraction just means a fraction where the numerator or the number of items that we're talking about is 1. So let's look at our different fractions. So we have a whole, so 1 is 1. Now we have our 2's here, or our halves. So the unit fraction for that would be one of those 2. Now remember, we're counting the chunk, okay? So we're starting here at 0. And we're counting the chunk over. So what is the name of this fraction? It's a unit fraction. That means it's one of the pieces. So how many? 1. What is its name? 1 what? Well, there are 2 pieces here, so it's 1 2. And again, we put that fraction bar in there because we know that it's not a 1 and a 2. It's 1 out of 2, 1 half. All right, so let's look at the next unit fraction. So we have 3's. So we know, I'm going to put this here so I can tell where that goes. So we know, again, it's a unit fraction. So here's our unit fraction. So we know unit fractions means we just want one of the pieces. 1 out of how many pieces? What's the name of each of these pieces? The name of each piece is a third. So we have one of those 3's, or 1/3. Keep using that vocabulary. Keep using the idea of how many and what is it called. So let's look at the next one. We have our what is it called is 4's. So we have 4 chunks. So we have this right here. Oh, look, that fourth is going to be really close to that third. And if you look at it down here, you can see that it's really close also. So we have this 1, because we want our unit fraction, and we want 1 chunk out of how many are there? Now, so some students, some children might say that there's a 3, because we've already used this one up. But remember, we talk about the name. What is the name of each piece? Not just the one that we're calling, but each piece. So its name is 4. So let's look at this one. We have 1. Now, what's its name? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Each piece is a 6 or a 6th, if we talk about it that way. So that would go right there. And then our last one, we have our unit fraction. Again, we just want one of those pieces, which is right here. And we're going to bump this up. And look what's happening. Now, for this piece, again, we have how many is 1. And what is the size of the piece? The size of the piece is 8. So look what's happening along here. We can see some things and play with these ideas in a lot of different ways, just using this one tool. So we could say, okay, well, let's look for some patterns. What are some patterns that you notice? Looking for patterns is what's called a math process standard, and it's an important part of being a mathematician. Make sure also that you, when you're talking to your child, that you're talking to them about the fact that they're mathematicians and you're a mathematician. Even if you don't feel like a mathematician, everyone is a mathematician. We can all play around with these numbers and have some fun. So let's look at it. Let's look at patterns. So we know 1/2 is here, or 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 6, 1, 8. Where do you think 1, 10 would go? If we're just looking at the patterns, just look at the patterns. Well, we could actually call this 1, 1. So we have 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Where do you think the 10 would go? And that's the kind of question you want to ask your child at home. Where do you think that would go? And then they might say over here, or they might say over here. Who knows what they're going to say? And anything they say, we'll put it down. So if your child said 1/10 would be over here, thinking, now that tells you a little bit something. That tells you that they're really not thinking of this together as a one representation of a number. They might say over here. So then what you do is you test it. So we have another strip. We take this strip, we fold it into 10 pieces, we put it down, and we can see what happens. So those are the kinds of questions you want to ask your student when we're starting to put fractions on a number line. So many things you can do with fractions on a number line. We can also look for common or equivalent fractions, it's called. So equivalent fractions are fractions that have different names. So the denominator, name, nom, is different, but they have the same value. It has a different name, but it has the same value. So let's look at this. The easiest one to see on ours right here is this half. So if we looked at this half, look what happens. We have 3 other pieces that have a line right on that mark. This one doesn't, so that won't have something that's equal to 1/2, but the rest of them do. So what does it mean? What else? That means on this number line, they all go up to a half. So what are those numbers? Well, now remember, always talk about the chunks, So if we want to know what this is 1 chunk and 2 chunks. So our quantity, our number is 2, and how many chunks are there altogether? There are 4 chunks. So 2/4 and 1/2, according to our experiment here, they're the same thing, and indeed they are. So let's look at this one. We have right here, let's look at our num, our numerator, the quantity 1, 2, 3, and then what are their names? So we're looking at these 3, but what's the name? How many? The name is each one of those is 6. So 3 out of 6. Now let's look at this one here, because we know all these are the same. So we have how many? So let's look at the nom, the denominator first on this one. So what's the name of each chunk, the name of each piece? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 pieces. So its name is 8. Oops. What's its num? How many of those 8s goes up to here? 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, your student can play around and do many others of these. There are some others that kind of match up. We have, if we look down, here's a third. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So this is a little bit of the experimentation. So a third is right here. So we have one more that we could do that is the same thing as a third. I'll just do this real super quick. So this one right here is the same as this third. Now what is this? Let's talk about what this fraction is. So how many chunks are there? There are 2, that's our quantity. How many? And what is each chunk called? What's its name? It's a 6. So we know that 2 6 and 1/3 is the same. So really talking about what things mean, why we call them what they call them. Sometimes mathematics has really like names that make so much sense, and if we just think about it in terms of just a word, we can help to figure it out. Sometimes though they come from different things like denominator and numerator, and so really knowing what they mean, where they come from, is helpful to your students. So I think there's enough fractions for today, but we'll be doing, I'm certain on Monday Math Days, we'll be doing some more fraction work, which I totally love the fractions. So we'll be posting this on our Facebook page. If you weren't able to join us live, well, if you weren't able to join us live, then I'm not talking to you, am I? But if you'd like to see this again, it'll be on our Facebook page. Please let us know if you have questions or topics that your child is coming home with their homework, not coming home, but home with on their homework. And we hope to be able to help as many people as we can. Hope you have a great week. If you try some of these things, take some pictures or give some comments and let the other parents or caregivers, guardians, whoever's with the kids at home, give them some ideas too, because you're the ones working with your student. You have those ideas. You're going to see what's going to be happening with your student, and we could all learn from each other. That's what this is all about. We really want to learn from each other, and I'm so excited to be able to help in that part. Thanks. Have a great day.